The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Wyoming territory as Delilah Harper's blood-stained fingers fumbled with the bandages she was wrapping around the stranger's bullet wound. She had found him collapsed near the creek that ran behind her small homestead, his breath shallow and skin burning with fever. The year was 1879, and out here, 60 miles from the nearest town of Sweetwater, a person's survival often depended on the kindness of strangers or becoming that kindness yourself. Delilah wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist, careful not to smear blood on her face. At 24, she had seen enough death to last several lifetimes, but she wasn't about to let this man become another ghost haunting her conscience. The stranger, middle-aged with a weathered face and trail-worn clothes, had managed to mumble something about a stagecoach robbery before losing consciousness again. "Hold on, mister," she whispered, though she doubted he could hear her. "Just hold on." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart leap into her throat. Out here, visitors were rare and not always welcome. Delilah reached for the shotgun she'd propped against the table, keeping it close as she moved to the window. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the setting sun. Tall in the saddle with broad shoulders, he rode with the easy confidence of a man who belonged in this harsh country. As he drew closer, she could make out the details: a dark Stetson pulled low, a tan duster coated with the dust of long travel, and a gun belt that looked well used but not worn for show. Delilah kept her shotgun ready as she stepped onto the porch. "That's far enough, stranger," she called out when the rider was within earshot. "State your business." The man reined his horse to a stop, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "Name's Colton Wade, madam. I'm tracking a stagecoach robbery. Following a blood trail that led this way." His eyes, a striking blue that reminded Delilah of the summer sky, moved from her face to the shotgun and back again. He didn't seem intimidated, just cautious. "You a lawman?" she asked, not lowering her weapon. "No, madam. I work for the stage company. They hired me to recover what was stolen and bring in whoever did it." His gaze shifted to the blood on her hands. "Seems I might be too late for one of them." Delilah hesitated, weighing her options. The stranger inside was badly wounded and needed more help than she could provide alone. But trusting another stranger wasn't something that came easily. "I found a man by the creek about an hour ago," she finally said. "Shot in the side. Don't know if he's your robber, but he's barely hanging on." Colton Wade dismounted with fluid grace, his movements those of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. He tied his horse to the porch rail, keeping his distance from her. "Mind if I take a look, Mississippi? Harper. Delilah Harper." She stepped aside but kept the shotgun ready. "And I do mind if you're planning to finish what that bullet started. Man deserves a trial if he's done wrong." A hint of a smile touched Colton's lips. "I'm not in the business of shooting wounded men, Miss Harper. Just want to see if he's one of the men I'm after." Delilah led him inside the cabin she'd built with her own hands after her father passed 3 years prior. It wasn't much a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom partitioned off in the back, and a lean-to kitchen, but it was hers, and she'd fought hard to keep it. The wounded man lay on her table, pale and still. Colton approached slowly, studying the man's face. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "That's Jim Hollis," he said quietly. "One of the robbers, all right. He's been shot." "I know. I'm the one who shot him." Delilah tightened her grip on the shotgun. "And now you've come to finish the job?" Colton shook his head, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair with touches of copper when the lamplight hit it. "Like I said, that's not my way. He's wounded because he fired on me first when I caught up to their camp. The others got away with the strongbox." He gestured to the man. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Bullet went clean through, but he's lost a lot of blood, and I'm worried about fever setting in." Delilah set the shotgun against the wall, close enough to reach if needed. "I've done what I can, but I'm no doctor." "Nearest doctor's in Sweetwater," Colton said, studying the wounded man. "He won't make the journey." "I know that. Delilah snapped, then softened her tone. Sorry. I can't just let him die without trying. Colton watched her as she returned to tending the wounded man, her movements gentle despite her obvious wariness. She had a quiet determination that impressed him. Not many women out here would take in a wounded stranger, especially alone on a remote homestead. You live here by yourself, Miss Harper? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. I do now. Her voice was flat, closing the door on that conversation. Colton nodded, respecting her privacy. I've got some experience with bullet wounds. Mind if I help? Delilah hesitated, then nodded. There's a bucket of clean water on the stove. Wash your hands first. For the next hour, they worked together in near silence, changing bandages, cooling the man's fever with wet cloths, and getting small amounts of water between his lips. Colton noticed the practiced way Delilah handled the task. This wasn't her first time tending to a serious injury. You've done this before, he observed as she expertly tied off a fresh bandage. My father taught me. Set out here, knowing how to stitch a wound was as important as knowing how to shoot straight. A shadow crossed her face. He was right. As night fell, Hollis's condition remained precarious. His breathing was shallow, and the fever hadn't broken. He needs watching through the night, Delilah said, rubbing her tired eyes. I'll take first watch, Colton offered. You get some rest. She looked at him with suspicion. So you can put a bullet in him while I sleep? Colton didn't take offense. Miss Harper, if I wanted him dead, I wouldn't have helped you try to save him for the past hour. Besides, he's more valuable to me alive. He can tell me where his partners took the money. Delilah studied him for a long moment before nodding. All right. Wake me in 4 hours to switch. She disappeared behind the partition to her bedroom but didn't fully close the canvas flap. Colton suspected she'd positioned herself to keep an eye on both him and the wounded man. Smart woman, he thought. He settled into a chair beside the table, checking Hollis's pulse periodically. The cabin was simple but clean and well maintained. Looking around, he saw signs of Delilah's life: a shelf of books, jars of preserves, hand-sewn curtains on the windows. It took grit to make a life out here, especially alone. 3 hours into his watch, Hollis stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Colton leaned forward. Hollis, can you hear me? The wounded man's eyes focused slowly. Recognition and fear crossed his face when he saw Colton. Wade, he croaked. Come to. Finish me off? No. But you're going to tell me where Blackwell and the others went with that strongbox. Hollis coughed weakly. Why should I? Because a woman who owes you nothing is trying to save your worthless hide, Colton said quietly, nodding toward the bedroom partition. And because I might be persuaded to tell the judge you cooperated. Hollis was silent for a long moment. They're headed for the old Hawkins mine. Planning to lay low? Split the money? How many? 4. Blackwell, Jenkins, the Porter brothers. His voice was fading. Blackwell shot the driver. Didn't have to. Man wasn't even reaching for his gun. Colton's jaw tightened. The stage driver, Sam Miller, had been a friend. Get some rest, Hollis. You've got a lot to answer for if you pull through. As Hollis drifted back to unconsciousness, Colton became aware of Delilah standing in the doorway of the partition, watching. Her honeyed blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, and in the soft lamplight, he could see the delicate features that hardship hadn't managed to erase: the gentle curve of her cheek, the determined set of her chin. How long have you been standing there? He asked. Long enough. She moved to check on Hollis. The Hawkins mine is about 15 miles north of here. Abandoned 3 years ago after a cave-in killed 6 men. You know it? My father was one of the 6. Her voice was steady, but her eyes revealed the pain that still lingered. I know it. Colton watched as she checked the wounded man's temperature with the back of her hand. There was a gentleness to her touch that contrasted with the hardness life had forced upon her. His fever's down a little, she said. That's something, at least. You should get more rest. I can keep watch a while longer. Delilah shook her head. I'm awake now. You get some sleep. That chair by the fireplace reclines a bit if you need it. Colton started to protest but stopped when he saw the stubborn set of her jaw. This was a woman used to having her way, or at least used to fighting for it. Wake me if his condition changes, he said, moving to the chair. It was more comfortable than he expected, and the warmth from the banked fire was welcome after the long day's ride. He watched through half-closed eyes as Delilah moved around the cabin, her movements efficient and graceful. There was something compelling about her, a strength that didn't diminish her femininity but enhanced it. Before long, the rhythm of her movements and the soft sounds of the night lulled him to sleep. Colton woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and for a moment, he was disoriented. Then he remembered the wounded robber, the stolen money, the woman who'd taken them both in. He sat up to find Delilah at the stove, her back to him as she cooked breakfast. Hollis was still on the table, but he'd been covered with a clean blanket and appeared to be sleeping naturally. How is he? Colton asked, his voice rough with sleep. Delilah turned, a coffee pot in hand. Better. Fever broke around dawn. He woke for a bit, took some water and broth. She poured coffee into a tin mug and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Colton was surprised by the warmth that spread through him at the brief contact. Thank you, he said, meaning it for more than just the coffee. Not many would have done what you did for a stranger. Delilah returned to the stove. My father always said our character is revealed in how we treat those who can do nothing for us in return. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. She placed a plate of bacon and biscuits on the small table. Eat. You'll need your strength if you're heading to the Hawkins mine. Colton raised an eyebrow. If? When? She corrected, a slight smile touching her lips. I know you're kind, Mr. Wade. You won't let those men go, especially after what Hollis said about the driver. Sam was a friend, Colton admitted, taking a seat at the table. Been driving that route for 15 years. Delilah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Family? Wife and 2 young boys in Sweetwater. He took a bite of the biscuit, surprised by how good it was. These are excellent. Wild honey makes the difference, she said, sitting across from him with her own plate. There's a hive about a mile east of here. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Colton found himself studying her in the morning light. Her features were more striking than he'd realized last night: high cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of whiskey. She caught him looking and held his gaze steadily, unafraid. What's your plan? She asked finally. 4 against 1 aren't good odds, even for someone who looks like they can handle themselves. I was hoping our friend there might be up for a ride to the nearest lawman once he's stable, Colton said, nodding toward Hollis. But that won't be today. No, it won't. Delilah took a sip of her coffee. The Hawkins mine has only one entrance now. The secondary shaft collapsed in the accident. If they're holed up inside, you'll be walking into a trap. Colton studied her face. You seem to know a lot about it. Like I said, my father died there. After the accident, I made it my business to know everything about that place. Something hardened in her eyes. The company claimed it was an unexpected weakness in the supporting timbers, but my father had reported concerns about those timbers for weeks before the collapse. I'm sorry, Colton said quietly. Delilah nodded once, acknowledging his sympathy without dwelling on it. There's another way in. A ventilation shaft on the north side. It's narrow, but a person could squeeze through. Comes out near the back of the main chamber. Colton set down his coffee. Why are you telling me this? Because 4 men who shoot stagecoach drivers for no reason shouldn't get away with it. She met his eyes directly. And because you strike me as the kind of man who might actually stand a chance of bringing them in alive to face justice. That's my intention, Colton confirmed. Though they might have different ideas. Men like that usually do. A groan from the table interrupted their conversation. Hollis was awake, trying to shift his position. Delilah immediately rose and went to him, helping him take a few sips of water. "Where am I?" Hollis asked, his voice weak. "My home," Delilah answered. "You've been shot, but you're going to live." Hollis's eyes moved to Colton, who had also approached the table. "Wade. Thought I dreamed you." "No such luck," Colton replied evenly. "How's the pain?" "Like fire." Hollis grimaced. "Why ain't I dead?" "Miss Harper here has been tending to you all night," Colton said. "You owe her your life." Hollis looked at Delilah with confusion, as if the concept of someone helping him without an angle was foreign. "Why would you help me?" Delilah checked his bandage before answering. "Because you needed it. Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger." As she stepped away from the table, Colton followed her to the water basin where she washed her hands. "I need to go after them," he said quietly. "They've had a day's head start already." Delilah dried her hands on a cloth. "I know. But you need to know what you're riding into. Give me an hour to draw you a map of the mine." Colton hesitated, then nodded. 1 hour. While Delilah sketched a detailed map of the mine's layout at her small desk, Colton prepared for the ride. He checked his guns, packed the provisions she offered, and tended to his horse. When he returned to the cabin, she was waiting with a folded piece of paper. "The main chamber is here," she said, unfolding the map and pointing. "That's likely where they'll be camped. The ventilation shaft comes out here, behind these support columns. It's about 20 feet of crawling, but it'll put you behind them instead of walking through the front door." Colton studied the map, impressed by its detail. "This is good work. I told you, I made it my business to know that place." She folded the map and handed it to him. "Be careful. That whole mine is unstable now." Colton tucked the map into his shirt pocket. "What about Hollis?" Delilah glanced at the wounded man, who had fallen back asleep. "I can manage him. He's too weak to cause trouble even if he wanted to. I don't like leaving you alone with him." "I've been alone with worse," she said simply. "Besides, I have my shotgun." Colton nodded, respecting her capability but still concerned. "I should be back by tomorrow evening. If I'm not, you will be," she said with a confidence he found oddly reassuring. He put on his hat and moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to her. "Thank you, Delilah. Not many would have done what you've done." She smiled a real smile that transformed her face and caught him off guard with its beauty. "Just come back in one piece, Mr. Wade." "Colton," he corrected. "After all this, I think you can call me Colton." "Colton," she repeated, and something in the way she said his name made his chest tighten unexpectedly. With the tip of his hat, he stepped out into the morning sunshine and mounted his horse. As he rode away, he found himself looking back at the small cabin, where Delilah stood on the porch watching him go. The image stayed with him as he rode north toward the Hawkins mine, carrying with it a strange sense that he was riding away from something important, not just toward his quarry. The Hawkins mine appeared on the horizon late that afternoon, exactly where Delilah had indicated it would be. Colton left his horse concealed in a stand of trees a half-mile away and approached on foot, moving carefully through the rocky terrain. The main entrance was just as Delilah had described, a dark opening in the hillside, reinforced with timber that had seen better days. Colton circled wide, staying out of sight as he made his way to the north side. Sure enough, the ventilation shaft was there, partially obscured by brush and debris. Colton cleared the opening and peered inside. It was narrow but passable, just as Delilah had said. He checked his guns once more, then began the difficult process of squeezing through the tight space, using Delilah's map as his guide. 20 minutes of uncomfortable crawling brought him to the end of the shaft. He could hear voices now, men arguing about something, their words echoing in the cavernous space beyond. Colton eased forward until he could see into the main chamber. 4 men were gathered around a small fire, a strongbox open beside them. Stacks of bills and coins were being counted and divided. Colton recognized Blackwell immediately, a tall, cruel-faced man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek. The others matched the descriptions he'd been given, the Porter brothers, nearly identical with their stocky builds and sandy hair, and Jenkins, a thin, nervous-looking man with a perpetual twitch. Colton drew his pistol and took a deep breath, then slid silently from the shaft and moved behind the support columns Delilah had marked on her map. From this position, he had clear sight of all four men, while they would have to turn completely around to see him. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice echoing in the chamber, "I suggest you put those weapons down." The reaction was instant. All four men reached for their guns, but only Blackwell was fool enough to draw. Colton's shot rang out, and Blackwell's gun clattered to the ground as he clutched his bleeding hand. "Next one won't be so considerate," Colton warned. "Hands up, all of you." Jenkins and the Porter brothers raised their hands slowly, but Blackwell glared with naked hatred. "You're a dead man, Wade," he snarled. "You think you can take all four of us?" "I already have," Colton replied calmly. "And it's only 3 now that Hollis is out of the picture." "Hollis is dead?" one of the Porter brothers asked. "Not yet, though not for lack of trying on your part." Colton gestured with his gun. "Now kick those weapons away and lie face down on the ground." For a tense moment, Colton thought Blackwell might try something desperate. But with his shooting hand wounded, the man finally complied, cursing as he lowered himself to the dirt floor. "Hollis talked, didn't he?" Jenkins asked as he lay down. "He did," Colton confirmed, moving forward cautiously, keeping his gun trained on them. "Told me everything, including how Blackwell shot the driver for no reason. It wasn't supposed to happen that way," the younger Porter brother mumbled. "Nobody was supposed to get hurt." "Shut up, Porter," Blackwell snapped. "No, you shut up," Porter shot back. "You're the one who turned this into a killing job. We signed on for a robbery, not murder." Colton used rope from his pack to bind each man's hands behind his back, keeping his gun ready. "You'll all get your chance to tell the judge your version." With the robbers secured, Colton gathered the stolen money back into the strongbox. According to the manifest, there should have been $8,500 in cash and several valuable parcels. A quick count confirmed it was all there. Getting 4 prisoners and a heavy strongbox back to civilization presented a challenge, but Colton had come prepared. He had a pack horse waiting with his mount, and by nightfall, he had his prisoners on the trail back toward Delilah's homestead. They made camp for the night in a defensible position, Colton keeping watch over his sullen captives. As he stared into the campfire, his thoughts drifted to Delilah, her courage, her kindness to a wounded stranger, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. He found himself eager to return, to tell her the map had worked perfectly, to see that rare smile again. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, not since before the war. Back then, he'd been a different man, younger, more optimistic, with dreams of a ranch of his own and a family to fill it. The years since had hardened him, turned him into the kind of man who tracked outlaws for a living and kept everyone at arm's length. But something about Delilah Harper had slipped past his defenses. Perhaps it was the way she tended to Hollis without judgment, or how she'd faced him with that shotgun, unafraid despite being alone and vulnerable. Whatever it was, Colton knew he wanted to understand it better. Morning came with a light rain that followed them for most of the journey. By late afternoon, they were approaching Delilah's homestead, the small cabin a welcome sight after the long, wet ride. Colton saw her step onto the porch as they approached, shotgun in hand, until she recognized him. Even from a distance, he could see the relief on her face, and it warmed something inside him that had been cold for too long. "Looks like you were successful," she called as they drew closer. "Your map was perfect," he replied, dismounting and approaching the porch while keeping an eye on his prisoners. "Not a scratch on me, as ordered." The smile that lit her face made the entire dangerous mission seem worthwhile. "And I see you brought friends." "Unwilling ones," Colton confirmed. How's our patient? Improving. He's been asking for you, actually. She nodded toward the 4 bound men. What will you do with them? Take them to Sweetwater tomorrow. Return the money, collect my fee, see them placed in custody. He looked at the darkening sky. But we'll need to impose on your hospitality for the night, if you're willing. Delilah studied the bedraggled group. I don't have room for everyone inside. They'll be fine in that shed, Colton said, nodding toward a small outbuilding near the corral. As long as it keeps the rain off. Delilah nodded. There's stew on the stove. Enough for you and them, though they don't deserve your consideration. It's not for them, Colton said. It's for me. I don't want to be the kind of man who starves his prisoners, even if they are murderers. Understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement that maintaining one's humanity in a harsh land was a choice made daily, in small ways that eventually defined a person. With the prisoners secured in the shed and fed, Colton finally entered the cabin, removing his wet coat and hat. The warmth from the fireplace and the smell of Delilah's cooking created a domestic atmosphere that felt almost foreign to him after so many years on the trail. Hollis was now in a makeshift bed near the fire instead of on the table, propped up on pillows and looking remarkably better than when Colton had left. You got them, Hollis said, his voice stronger than before. I did, Colton confirmed. Your information was good. Hollis looked away. What happens to me now? You'll stand trial with the others. But I'll speak to the judge about your cooperation. Colton removed his gun belt and hung it near the door. Whether that makes a difference is up to him. Delilah placed a bowl of stew on the table. Eat while it's hot. You look half frozen. Colton didn't need to be told twice. He sat at the table, savoring the hearty stew while Delilah bustled around the cabin, tending to Hollis and preparing more food for the prisoners. You didn't have to feed them, Colton said between bites. I know. She shrugged. But like you said, it's about who we choose to be. After dinner, with Hollis asleep and the prisoners secured, Colton and Delilah sat before the fire. The rain had picked up, drumming steadily on the roof and creating a cozy atmosphere inside the cabin. Tell me about your father, Colton said quietly, watching the firelight play across her features. Delilah was silent for a moment, then began to speak, her voice soft with memory. Daniel Harper. He came west after the war, looking for a fresh start. My mother died when I was 12, influenza, and after that, it was just the 2 of us. He taught me everything: how to shoot, how to hunt, how to tend this land. He taught you well. He wanted me to be able to survive on my own if anything happened to him. Her voice caught slightly. I guess he knew the risks of the mine better than he let on. And after the accident? No other family? She shook her head. None that would claim me. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. They thought he was beneath her, the daughter of a Boston merchant marrying a farmer turned soldier. So you stayed here alone. This land is mine. Paid for with my father's sweat and blood. There was fierce pride in her voice. I wasn't about to abandon it. Colton nodded, understanding that kind of determination. It can't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. She turned those whiskey-colored eyes toward him. What about you? What made Colton Wade into a man who tracks outlaws for a living? He hadn't spoken about his past in years, but something about Delilah made him want to share the burden he usually carried alone. I was a rancher once, he said, staring into the flames. Had a small spread in Colorado. Wife, son, 20 head of cattle. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Delilah's voice was gentle. What happened? Rustlers came while I was in town buying supplies. My wife, Caroline, tried to stop them. His voice grew tight. My boy was only 4. They didn't have to kill them. I'm so sorry, Delilah whispered. The local law didn't do much, said they'd probably crossed into New Mexico territory. So I tracked them myself. His eyes hardened at the memory. Took me 6 months, but I found every last one. After that, I couldn't go back to ranching. The stage company offered me work tracking robbers, and it seemed as good a way as any to keep going. Delilah reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her touch was warm, comforting in a way he hadn't experienced in years. How long ago? She asked. 8 years this June. They sat in silence for a long while, her hand still in his, the connection between them deepening without words. The rain continued to fall, isolating them in their small island of warmth and unexpected understanding. It's getting late, Delilah finally said, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. I should check on the prisoners, Colton agreed, equally reluctant to break the moment. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had endured loss but refused to be defined by it. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Delilah withdrew her hand and stood. There are blankets in the chest if you need more for the night. Colton nodded, rising as well. Thank you. For everything. He stepped out into the rain to check on his prisoners, finding them secure but uncomfortable in the shed. None had managed to work free of their bonds, and though Blackwell glared hatred at him, the others seemed resigned to their fate. When he returned to the cabin, soaked once more, Delilah had prepared a pallet for him near the fire, across from where Hollis slept. She had retreated behind her partition, but the canvas wasn't fully closed. Good night, Colton. Her voice came softly from the darkness. Good night, Delilah, he replied, settling onto the pallet and staring into the dying embers of the fire. Despite his exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. His mind kept returning to the feel of Delilah's hand in his, the understanding in her eyes when he spoke of his past, the strength that allowed her to carve out a life here alone. He had known many women over the years, but none quite like her. Morning arrived with clearing skies and the promise of a warm day. Colton woke to find Delilah already up, preparing breakfast. Hollis was awake as well, sitting up and looking stronger by the hour. I've been thinking, Delilah said as she placed a plate of eggs and bacon before Colton. I should come with you to Sweetwater. Colton paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Why? Hollis needs a doctor to properly check his wound, and I need supplies anyway. She glanced at the wounded man. Besides, I might be able to help with your testimony about his condition when you found him. It made sense, but Colton suspected there was more to it. It's a 2-day ride with the prisoners. Could be dangerous. I can handle myself, she said simply, in a tone that brooked no argument. And so, after breakfast, they prepared for the journey. Delilah helped Hollis onto a spare horse, his hands bound to the saddle horn but loose enough to allow him to balance. The other prisoners were similarly mounted, with Blackwell's wounded hand properly bandaged. As Delilah secured her cabin and loaded her pack horse with empty sacks for the supplies she would purchase, Colton found himself watching her with growing admiration. Every movement was efficient, every decision practical. She was a woman who had learned to survive on her own terms in a land that showed little mercy to those who faltered. They set out mid-morning, Colton leading the way with Delilah riding beside him, the prisoners strung out behind them. The journey would take them across open country for the first day, camping overnight before reaching Sweetwater the following afternoon. As they rode, Delilah pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory where the best hunting could be found, which creeks never ran dry even in the worst droughts, the location of a hidden valley that bloomed with wildflowers each spring. You love this land, Colton observed as they paused to rest the horses near midday. I do, she admitted, surveying the sweeping landscape of rolling hills and distant mountains. It's harsh and unforgiving, but honest in its way. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Like some people, Colton said, glancing back at their prisoners. Exactly. She smiled, and Colton found himself wanting to be the cause of that smile more often. They made camp that evening in a protected hollow beside a small stream. With the prisoners secured, Colton and Delilah shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. What will you do after you deliver them to Sweetwater? Delilah asked as they sat beside the campfire. Colton poked at the embers with a stick. The stage company will have other jobs, I expect. Always someone trying to steal something that isn't theirs. Is that all you want? To keep hunting men like these? The question hit closer to home than he expected. It's what I'm good at. That's not what I asked? Colton met her gaze across the fire. No, it's not all I want. But it's what I've allowed myself to have. Delilah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Because of your wife and son? Partly, he admitted. After losing them, the idea of caring about anyone or anything seemed like asking for more pain. And now? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Colton really looked at her, and saw not just the strong, capable woman who had taken in a wounded stranger, but also the vulnerability she kept carefully hidden. Now I'm not so sure, he said finally. The next morning brought them within sight of Sweetwater by noon. The small town was larger than Colton had described, with several streets of buildings, including a proper courthouse, jail, and doctor's office. Their arrival caused a stir, as it always did when Colton brought and wanted men. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran named Burke, met them in front of the jail. Wade, he greeted, eyeing the prisoners. Heard about the stage robbery. These the ones? All accounted for, Colton confirmed, dismounting. Including the money. Burke nodded approvingly, then noticed Delilah. Madam, he said, tipping his hat. Sheriff, she replied. I'm Delilah Harper. I found this one. She nodded toward Hollis. Wounded near my property and tended to him until Mr. Wade arrived. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. That's so? Well, Miss Harper, sounds like you've done this town a service. As the prisoners were escorted into the jail, Colton helped Delilah down from her horse. Let's get Hollis to the doctor, then I'll help you with your supplies. The town doctor, a middle-aged man named Franklin, examined Hollis's wound with professional interest. Clean work, he told Delilah. If he lives, it'll be thanks to your care in those first crucial hours. Will he recover enough to stand trial? Colton asked. Dr. Franklin nodded. Given time and proper care, yes. Though he'll carry that scar for the rest of his life. With Hollis left in the doctor's care under guard, Colton accompanied Delilah to the general store. As she selected flour, coffee, ammunition, and other necessities, the storekeeper chatted amiably. Miss Harper, haven't seen you in town for months, the older man said. Everything all right out at your place? Just fine, Mr. Daniels, she replied. Been busy with the garden and livestock. Heard you might be selling. Jameson's been saying he made you an offer on that land of yours. Delilah's expression hardened. Jameson can say what he likes. That land isn't for sale. The storekeeper glanced between her and Colton. Well, can't blame a man for trying. It's good grazing land, and with you out there all alone. I manage just fine, Delilah said firmly, ending the conversation. As they left the store, Colton carried most of her supplies. Who's Jameson? Donald Jameson. Owns the biggest cattle operation around here. Delilah's voice was tight. He's been trying to buy my land since my father died. Seems to think a woman can't possibly want to run a homestead herself. And he won't take no for an answer? He's persistent, she admitted. Sends one of his men by every few months with a new offer. Each time I say no, the offer gets a little higher and the threats get a little less veiled. Colton frowned. Threats? Nothing direct. Just comments about how dangerous it is for a woman alone, how unfortunate it would be if something happened to my livestock, or if a fire started during the dry season. She shrugged. Nothing I can take to the sheriff. A protective anger rose in Colton's chest. Has he done anything? Damaged property, rustled stock? Not yet. But I keep my shotgun loaded and sleep lightly. She smiled faintly. It's why I was so quick to greet you when you rode up to my cabin. They secured her supplies on the pack horse, and Colton suggested they get a proper meal at the hotel restaurant before heading to the bank where he would turn over the recovered money. The restaurant was the finest establishment in Sweetwater, which wasn't saying much, but the food was hot and plentiful. As they ate, Colton noticed several people watching them with interest. "We're causing quite a stir," he said quietly. Delilah glanced around. "Small towns run on gossip. By sunset, everyone will have decided we're either engaged or mortal enemies. Which would you prefer?" Colton asked with a small smile. "Neither," she replied, but her eyes held a warmth that made his heart beat faster. Their meal was interrupted by the arrival of a large man in an expensive suit, flanked by two rough-looking cowboys. Delilah tensed immediately, and Colton knew without being told that this was Jameson. "Miss Harper," the man said, his voice overly cordial. "What a pleasant surprise. We've missed seeing you in town." "Mr. Jameson," Delilah acknowledged coolly. "I'm afraid I'm rather busy today." Jameson's gaze shifted to Colton, assessing him with the practiced eye of a man used to measuring potential threats. "And who might this be?" "Colton Wade," Colton replied before Delilah could answer. "Just passing through." "Wade?" Jameson's eyebrows rose. "The bounty hunter?" "I work for the stage company," Colton corrected. "Tracking robbers, recovering stolen property." "Ah, yes. I heard about your success with the recent stage robbery." Jameson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Impressive work." "Thank you." Jameson turned his attention back to Delilah. "I understand Mr. Daniels mentioned my offer. I hope you'll reconsider, Miss Harper. It's a very generous amount for land that must be quite difficult for a woman alone to manage. As I've told your men repeatedly, Mr. Jameson, my land is not for sale." Delilah's voice was firm. "Not now, not ever." A flash of anger crossed Jameson's face before he composed himself. "I see. Well, the offer remains open should you change your mind. These can be dangerous times for isolated homesteads." The implied threat wasn't lost on Colton. "Is that so, Mr. Jameson?" "Merely an observation, Mr. Wade." Jameson's smile was thin. "Good day to you both." As Jameson and his men left, Colton noticed Delilah's hands trembling slightly as she picked up her coffee cup. "Does he always make a point of threatening you in public?" Colton asked quietly. "Usually he's more subtle." She took a deep breath. "He's getting impatient." Colton considered this. "How long will you stay in town?" "Just long enough to finish my business. I'd like to be on the trail home by mid-afternoon." "I'll ride back with you," he said, the decision made before he'd fully thought it through. Delilah looked surprised. "What about the stage company? Don't you need to collect your fee and report to them?" "I'll do that now. The bank manager can wire my report to the company office in Cheyenne." Colton met her gaze steadily. "I don't like the way Jameson looked at you. I can take care of myself," she reminded him, but there was something in her eyes, a softening, perhaps gratitude, that told him she appreciated the offer. "I know you can. But sometimes it's good to have someone watching your back." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I left my bedroll at your cabin." Delilah laughed, a genuine sound that lightened the tension between them. "Well, we can't have you riding the territory without your bedroll." After completing their business in town, Colton turning over the recovered money and Delilah purchasing the last of her supplies, they prepared to leave. As they were loading the pack horse, Sheriff Burke approached. "Wade, thought you'd want to know. Judge Parker will be here next week for the circuit court." "Your robbers will stand trial then." "Good." Colton nodded. "Will you need me to testify?" "Most likely." "Can you stick around, or should I send word when the judge arrives?" Colton glanced at Delilah, a question in his eyes. She gave a slight nod. "Send word to the Harper homestead," Colton told the sheriff. "I'll be there for a few days at least." Burke looked between them, a knowing smile crossing his weathered face. "I'll do that." He tipped his hat to Delilah. "Safe journey, Miss Harper." They left Sweetwater with the afternoon sun warm on their backs, riding side by side in comfortable silence. The journey seemed shorter somehow, with just the two of them and no prisoners to manage. As they made camp that evening, Colton found himself watching Delilah, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the quiet competence with which she handled every task. She caught him looking more than once but didn't seem to mind, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. After dinner, they sat beside the fire, closer than they had been the previous night. The stars spread across the sky in a brilliant display that city dwellers would never understand. "Why did you really decide to come back with me?" Delilah asked suddenly. Colton considered the question carefully. "Partly because I don't trust Jameson. But mostly because I'm not ready to say goodbye to you yet." The honesty of his answer seemed to surprise her. She looked at him for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "I'm not ready for that either," she admitted softly. Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier falling, a possibility opening. Colton reached out slowly and took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. When she didn't pull away, he moved closer, drawn to her like a moth to flame. "Delilah," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. She met his gaze, vulnerability and strength mingled in her expression. "Yes? I haven't felt this way in a very long time," he confessed. "It scares me." "Me too," she whispered. "I've been alone so long, I've almost forgotten how not to be." Colton raised his free hand to gently touch her cheek. "I never expected to find someone like you. What am I like?" she asked, leaning slightly into his touch. "Brave. Kind. Stubborn." His mouth curved into a smile. "Beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with just your face, though that's pretty remarkable too." A blush colored her cheeks, visible even in the firelight. "You're not so bad yourself, for a man who tracks outlaws." Her teasing broke the tension, and they both laughed softly. Then, as naturally as breathing, Colton leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When she responded, moving closer and sliding her hand to his shoulder, the kiss deepened into something more urgent, years of loneliness and guarded hearts giving way to newfound connection. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably check the horses," he said reluctantly. Delilah smiled, her eyes still closed. "Probably." Neither moved for a long moment, savoring the closeness. Finally, Colton stood, offering her his hand to help her up. The touch lingered, a promise of things to come. "Good night, Delilah," he said softly. "Good night, Colton." They slept on opposite sides of the fire that night, but something fundamental had changed between them. A connection had formed, fragile but real, built on shared pain and mutual respect. They reached Delilah's homestead the following day, the familiar cabin a welcome sight after their journey. As they unloaded the supplies and tended to the horses, they moved around each other with a new awareness, small touches and shared glances acknowledging what had begun between them. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Colton voiced the question that had been on his mind. "What happens now?" he asked. Delilah turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I'm not sure. I have my land, you have your job with the stage company. Jobs can change," Colton said carefully. "If there's reason enough." Hope flickered in her eyes. "And is there? Reason enough?" Colton took her hand. "I think there could be. If we give it time to grow." "Time," she repeated, a smile touching her lips. "I have plenty of that. Then maybe I could stay a while. Help with some repairs around the place, ride to Sweetwater for the trial when the judge arrives." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "See where this leads." "I'd like that," Delilah said softly. Over the next several days, they fell into a rhythm together. Colton repaired the roof that had been leaking, reinforced the corral fence, and helped Delilah with the daily chores. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, sometimes talking long into the night, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Colton learned about Delilah's dreams for her land, the crops she wanted to plant, the additional livestock she hoped to acquire. She, in turn, discovered his knowledge of cattle and his quiet longing for a place to call home again. They were cautious with each other, both aware of the wounds they carried. But each day brought new moments of connection, a shared laugh over breakfast, the brush of hands while working side by side, increasingly passionate kisses in the glow of the evening fire. A week after their return, word came from Sheriff Burke that Judge Parker had arrived and the trial would begin the following day. Colton prepared to ride to Sweetwater, planning to return as soon as his testimony was complete. "Be careful," Delilah said as she walked him to his horse. "Jameson might have friends on the jury." "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised, drawing her into his arms for a lingering kiss. Delilah watched him ride away, a mixture of emotions playing across her face. For the first time in years, she had allowed someone past her carefully constructed defenses, and it both thrilled and terrified her. Colton arrived in Sweetwater to find the town buzzing with activity. The arrival of the circuit judge was always an event, bringing people from the surrounding countryside for both business and entertainment. The trial began the next morning, with all 4 robbers facing charges of robbery, assault, and in Blackwell's case, murder. Hollis, still recovering but well enough to stand trial, looked nervous as he was brought into the courtroom. Colton's testimony was straightforward. He described tracking the robbers, finding Hollis wounded at Delilah's homestead, and the subsequent capture of the others at the Hawkins mine. When asked about Hollis, he confirmed the man's cooperation. "In your professional opinion, Mr. Wade, did the defendant Hollis show genuine remorse for his actions?" Judge Parker asked. Colton considered the question carefully. "Yes, Your Honor. He provided information that led to the capture of his accomplices and the recovery of the stolen money, knowing it would likely incriminate him as well." The judge nodded thoughtfully. As the trial continued, Colton noticed Jameson sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching the proceedings with interest. Their eyes met briefly, and something in Jameson's expression sent a chill down Colton's spine. By the end of the day, the verdict was reached. Blackwell was sentenced to hang for the murder of the stage driver. The Porter brothers and Jenkins received 15 years each for their roles in the robbery. Hollis, in recognition of his cooperation, was sentenced to 10 years, with possibility of parole after 5 for good behavior. As the courtroom emptied, Sheriff Burke approached Colton. "Clean work, Wade. Stage company's mighty pleased." "Good to hear," Colton replied, distracted by the sight of Jameson deep in conversation with 2 rough-looking men he didn't recognize. "Something wrong?" Burke asked, following his gaze. "Maybe. Jameson's been pressuring Delilah Harper to sell her land. Making threats." Burke frowned. "Threats? What kind?" "Nothing direct enough to bring to you officially. But I don't trust him." Colton nodded toward the men with Jameson. "Know those 2? The big one is Tom Reeves. Used to ride with the Hardin gang until they were broken up a few years back. Never could pin anything on him, but he's trouble." Burke's expression darkened. "The other one's new around here." Colton's instincts, honed by years of tracking dangerous men, were screaming a warning. "I need to get back to Delilah's place." "You think Jameson would try something?" Burke asked, concerned. "I think he's the type who doesn't like being told no, especially by a woman." Colton was already moving toward the door. "And I've been away too long already." Colton rode hard, pushing his horse to its limits. The journey that had taken a leisurely day and a half on their return from Sweetwater was compressed into a grueling overnight ride. By dawn, he was exhausted, but the sight of smoke on the horizon where Delilah's cabin should be sent fresh adrenaline coursing through his veins. As he crested the final rise, his worst fears were confirmed. The corral fence had been torn down, livestock scattered, and the small shed was ablaze. The cabin itself appeared intact, but there was no sign of Delilah. "Delilah!" he shouted, galloping toward the homestead. "Delilah!" As he dismounted, the cabin door burst open, and Delilah emerged, shotgun in hand. Her face was smudged with soot, a cut on her cheek bleeding freely, but she was wonderfully, gloriously alive. "Colton!" she cried, lowering the shotgun as she recognized him. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, gathering her into his arms. Are you hurt? What happened? Jameson's men, she said, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear. 3 of them came just after midnight. Said since I wouldn't sell, they'd make sure there was nothing worth keeping. Colton's hands moved over her, checking for injuries. The cut on your face, it's nothing. One of them tried to grab me, but he wasn't expecting the knife I keep in my boot. There was fierce satisfaction in her voice. He's got a worse cut to remember me by. Did they? Colton couldn't bring himself to finish the question. No, she assured him, understanding what he was asking. They didn't touch me beyond that one try. They were more interested in destroying the place. She gestured toward the burning shed. They set fire to the shed, scattered the livestock, poisoned the well. Cold fury settled in Colton's chest. Where are they now? Rode off about an hour ago, headed west. Her eyes hardened. They said they'd be back tomorrow to see if I was ready to accept Jameson's offer. Colton looked at the destruction around them. The shed was a total loss, the corral would need to be completely rebuilt, and the well that was the worst blow, as water was life out here. Pack what you can, he said decisively. We're leaving. Delilah stiffened. I'm not abandoning my land. Not abandoning, he clarified. Retreating temporarily. We need to report this to Sheriff Burke, and I want you somewhere safe while I deal with Jameson. This is my fight, she argued, fire in her eyes. And now it's mine too, he countered, cupping her face gently in his hands. Please, Delilah. I've lost someone I loved to violence before. I can't. His voice broke. I can't go through that again. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Delilah's expression softened as she registered his words. Someone you loved, she repeated softly. Colton nodded, suddenly vulnerable. Yes. And now? Now I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. And it terrifies me more than any gunfight ever has. Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. I'm falling in love with you too. The confession, spoken in the midst of destruction, somehow made everything else fade into the background. Colton kissed her, pouring all his fear, relief, and newfound love into the embrace. When they parted, Delilah nodded. All right. We'll go to Sweetwater. But I'm coming back, Colton. This is my home. Our home, he corrected gently. If you'll have me. The smile that lit her face was answer enough. They worked quickly, salvaging what they could from the cabin. The most precious items, her father's Bible, her mother's locket, the deed to the land, went into a saddlebag. Clothing, some food supplies, and Delilah's small savings followed. By mid-morning, they were ready to leave. Delilah took one last look at the cabin her father had built. We'll be back, Colton promised. And we'll rebuild everything they destroyed. The journey to Sweetwater was slower this time, with Delilah still shaken from the attack despite her brave front. They arrived by evening and went directly to the sheriff's office. Burke was furious when he heard their story. Damned if I'll let Jameson or anyone else run roughshod over honest folk, he growled. Miss Harper, I'll need a full statement. While Delilah gave her statement, Colton paced the office, his mind working through their options. When she finished, Burke slammed his fist on the desk. I'll arrest those men, but without witnesses besides you, Miss Harper, it might be hard to make the charges stick. And Jameson's got friends in high places. Then we'll need to be smarter than him, Colton said. Sheriff, can you keep Delilah safe here in town for a few days? Burke nodded. Sarah can put her up at the boarding house. Nobody'll bother her there. What are you planning? Delilah asked, concern in her voice. Jameson's men said they'd be back tomorrow to see if you're ready to sell, Colton reminded her. I think someone should be there to greet them. Not alone, she protested. No, Burke agreed. Not alone. By the next morning, a plan had formed. Burke deputized Colton and 2 other men he trusted, a former Texas Ranger named Hawkins and a local rancher who'd had his own run-ins with Jameson in the past. They rode out to Delilah's homestead, arriving by mid-afternoon. The shed had burned to the ground, but the cabin still stood, silent and waiting. They positioned themselves strategically, Hawkins in the trees behind the cabin, the rancher in the remains of the corral, and Colton inside the cabin itself. As the sun began to set, the sound of approaching riders reached them. Colton peered through the window to see 3 men approaching, the same 2 he'd seen with Jameson in the courtroom, plus a third he didn't recognize. They dismounted confidently, laughing among themselves as they approached the cabin. "Miss Harper!" the largest man called out. "Time to talk business." Colton waited until they were all on the porch before throwing open the door, his gun leveled at them. "Miss Harper isn't here," he said coldly. "But I'd be happy to discuss business with you gentlemen." The men froze, clearly not expecting to find Colton Wade waiting for them. "This ain't your concern, Wade," the leader Reeves, according to Burke, growled. "When you threaten a woman under my protection, it becomes my concern." Colton's voice was deadly calm. "Now you boys have 2 choices. You can surrender your weapons and come peacefully to face charges of assault, destruction of property, and attempted intimidation. Or you can try something stupid and face the consequences." Reeves's hand twitched toward his gun, but before he could draw, Hawkins and the rancher emerged from their hiding places, weapons trained on the 3 men. "I wouldn't," Hawkins advised dryly. "Mr. Wade here is known for his aim, and I'm not too shabby myself." Faced with overwhelming odds, the 3 men surrendered their weapons. As they were being tied up, Colton addressed Reeves directly. "One question before we take you in. Was this Jameson's idea, or did you decide to take matters into your own hands?" Reeves spat on the ground. "I don't know what you're talking about. We were just passing through, stopped to ask for water." "At midnight? With torches?" Colton shook his head. "Try again." But Reeves remained stubbornly silent, and the other 2 followed his lead. As they were loaded onto their horses for the ride back to Sweetwater, Colton knew they faced an uphill battle linking the attack to Jameson directly. Back in town, Burke locked up the 3 men and took their statements. As expected, all 3 denied any connection to Jameson and claimed they had simply been passing through the area. "Without evidence linking Jameson to the attack, all we can hold them for is the damage they did," Burke explained apologetically to Colton and Delilah. "And even that might not stick if Jameson hires a good lawyer for them. So they get away with it," Delilah said bitterly. "Not necessarily," Colton replied, a plan forming. "Jameson doesn't know we've caught his men. He's expecting them to report back that you're ready to sell." Burke caught on immediately. "So when they don't return, he'll either send more men or come himself," Colton finished. "You want to use me as bait," Delilah realized. "No," Colton said firmly. "I want to create the appearance that you're alone and vulnerable, but you'll be safely here in town." "And who will be at my cabin?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Me," Colton said. "Along with Sheriff Burke and as many deputies as he can spare." Delilah shook her head. "If we're doing this, I'm coming too. It's my home, my fight." Colton started to protest, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. He recognized that look. It was the same one she'd worn when insisting on caring for a wounded stranger, the same one she'd shown when refusing to abandon her land. "All right," he conceded. "But you stay out of sight until it's over." The trap was set. Word was allowed to spread that Delilah Harper had returned to her homestead alone, defiant despite the destruction of her property. Meanwhile, Burke assembled a force of 6 men, all positioned around the cabin out of sight. They didn't have to wait long. 2 days after the capture of his men, Donald Jameson himself rode onto Delilah's property, accompanied by 4 armed men. They approached the cabin with the confidence of those who believed they held all the cards. "Miss Harper," Jameson called out, "I understand you've had some trouble. I've come to renew my offer for your land." Delilah, who had been instructed to remain inside the cabin with Colton, tensed at the sound of his voice. Colton placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let me handle this," he whispered. He moved to the door and stepped onto the porch, gun holstered but ready. Mr. Jameson, he greeted coldly. Miss Harper isn't interested in selling. Not now, not ever. Jameson's face darkened with anger. Wade, what are you doing here? Protecting what's mine, Colton replied simply. Yours? Jameson laughed, though there was no humor in it. This land belongs to. He wasn't talking about the land. Delilah stepped onto the porch beside Colton, her shotgun in hand. Though that's mine, and staying that way. Jameson's expression hardened as he looked between them. I see. Well, that's unfortunate. I had hoped to resolve this matter peacefully. By sending men to destroy my property and threaten me? Delilah challenged. That's your idea of peaceful? I don't know what you're talking about, Jameson said smoothly. But clearly this homestead is too much for a woman to manage alone. The sensible thing would be to sell before more accidents occur. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Jameson, Sheriff Burke said, emerging from around the side of the cabin with his deputies. In fact, I'd say it's enough to justify arresting you for conspiracy and attempted intimidation. Jameson's men reached for their weapons, but stopped when they realized they were surrounded and outgunned. You have no proof I was involved in any wrongdoing, Jameson blustered. Actually, we do, Burke said. Your man Reeves decided cooperation might reduce his sentence. Signed a full confession this morning, implicating you in ordering the destruction of Miss Harper's property. The color drained from Jameson's face. He's lying. Maybe, Colton agreed. But combined with what we all just heard, it's enough for Judge Parker to take an interest. He's still in town, you know. Jameson looked trapped, his carefully constructed veneer of respectability crumbling before their eyes. This is absurd. I'm a businessman, not some common criminal. A businessman who uses threats and violence to get what he wants, Delilah said. Not anymore. Burke stepped forward. Donald Jameson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit property damage, intimidation, and attempted coercion. You boys, he addressed Jameson's men, can drop those gun belts nice and slow. You're coming in too. The ride back to Sweetwater was tense but uneventful. Jameson maintained his innocence, but the evidence against him was mounting. With Reeves's testimony and the witness threat at the homestead, even Jameson's influential friends would have difficulty protecting him. As the prisoners were locked away, Burke turned to Colton and Delilah. Judge Parker will hear the case tomorrow. After that, Miss Harper, your land should be safe. Thank you, Sheriff, Delilah said sincerely. Once alone, Colton and Delilah returned to the boarding house where she'd been staying. In the privacy of the small parlor, he took her hands in his. It's over, he said softly. You can go home now. Home, she repeated, looking into his eyes. Will you come with me? If you want me to. I do. She squeezed his hands. But not just as a protector or a friend. Colton's heart raced. What did you have in mind? A partner. In every sense. Her eyes held his, vulnerable yet certain. I love you, Colton Wade. These past weeks have shown me that I don't want to be alone anymore, not when I could be with you. I love you too, he said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. I never thought I'd find this again after Caroline died. Never thought I'd want to. And now? Now I want a life with you. On your land, building something together. He smiled softly. If you'll have me. I think we established that when I said I love you. She teased, her eyes bright with happiness. The next day, they attended the hearing before Judge Parker. True to Burke's prediction, the evidence was compelling enough that even Jameson's expensive lawyer couldn't prevent his client from being bound over for trial. Reeves and the other men received sentences for their direct involvement in the attack on Delilah's property. As they left the courthouse, Colton noticed Delilah seemed distracted. What is it? He asked. Just thinking about all the work ahead, she admitted. The well needs cleaning, the corral rebuilding, the shed replacing. I'm pretty good with my hands, Colton said. And I know some men who owe me favors. She smiled up at him. Is that right? It is. He drew her away from the bustle of the street, into the quiet shade beside the courthouse. But before we start on all that, there's something I need to ask you. Delilah looked at him curiously. What's that? Colton took a deep breath. I know it's fast. We've only known each other a few weeks. But sometimes you just know. He took her hands in his. Delilah Harper, will you marry me? Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened with emotion. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will. The kiss they shared sealed the promise, witnessed only by the blue Wyoming sky above. They were married 2 days later in a small ceremony at the Sweetwater Church, with Sheriff Burke and Dr. Franklin as witnesses. The bride wore a simple blue dress purchased from the town seamstress, and the groom wore the cleanest shirt he owned, his gun belt absent for perhaps the first time in years. As they exchanged vows, Colton found himself marveling at the unexpected turn his life had taken. A month ago, he had been a solitary man tracking outlaws across the territory, his heart closed to the possibility of love. Now, looking into Delilah's radiant face as she became his wife, he couldn't imagine returning to that lonely existence. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Sweetwater, a luxury neither had experienced in years, before setting out the next morning for the homestead that would now be their home together. The damage from Jameson's men was still evident, but somehow it seemed less daunting now that they faced it together. Over the next weeks, they worked side by side to restore what had been destroyed. The well was cleaned and deemed safe once more, the corral rebuilt stronger than before, and a new shed constructed to replace the one that had burned. Word of their story spread throughout the territory, and several of Colton's friends from his days with the stage company arrived to help with the rebuilding. Even Hollis, now serving his sentence but permitted to write letters, sent a note of congratulations and gratitude for the kindness Delilah had shown him. As summer turned to fall, the homestead flourished under their combined care. Colton's knowledge of cattle helped expand their small herd, while Delilah's garden produced a bounty that would see them through the winter. They added a room to the cabin, giving them more space for the future they both envisioned. On a crisp October evening, they sat on the porch they had built together, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Delilah leaned against Colton's shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her. Happy? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. You. Complete, he said, the word carrying all the meaning his heart held. For the first time in 8 years I feel complete. Delilah turned in his embrace to face him. I have something to tell you. The seriousness of her tone made him tense slightly. What is it? A smile bloomed on her face, radiant with joy. Dr. Franklin confirmed it yesterday when we were in town. We're going to have a baby. Colton stared at her in wonder, his heart swelling with an emotion too powerful for words. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, imagining the tiny life growing within. A baby, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Our baby. Our family, Delilah corrected, covering his hand with hers. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Colton held his wife close, marveling at how a chance encounter with a woman tending a wounded stranger had led him to the greatest happiness he had ever known. Life in the Wyoming territory was never easy, but facing it together with love, courage, and the promise of a new generation to come made every challenge worthwhile. In the years that followed, the Wade homestead became known throughout the territory as a place of warmth and welcome. Their family grew with the birth of twin daughters in the spring, followed by a son 2 years later. Colton occasionally rode with the sheriff when particularly dangerous outlaws threatened the peace, but his bounty hunting days were behind him. And whenever travelers passed through, seeking shelter or assistance, they were never turned away. For Delilah and Colton Wade understood better than most how a simple act of kindness tending to a wounded stranger could change lives in ways no one could predict, opening hearts that had been closed by pain and creating a love strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds.